sorry about that. Internet बैठ गया था. Because Sherry ने request की है कि I explain real and per capita once again because he didn't get it. So the reason why we need to take to remove inflation and to rather to take inflation into account is because when talking about national income, like when talking about GDP rather, the idea is it was the value, the monetary value of the goods and services produced. It could very well happen that if prices go up, हर चीज समोसा को 10 रुपए की नहीं 20 रुपए को बेच जाते हैं, so you're like, okay, the monetary value of those goods and services would definitely then increase, right? Even though maybe output hasn't increased. So that's the issue. If inflation comes about, prices can go up and your GDP would increase even though you've actually not grown at all. Which is why we measure GDP not at market prices but at constant prices, which are the prices of a particular base year. That's how we get real GDP. The reason why you need to take per capita into account is because of the basic idea, like the two things, right? The first thing, when you're trying to compare between different countries, किसी country की ज़्यादा population है, so there are obviously greater consumption and so on, hence उसका GDP might be larger, but for the average person the standard of living might not be that high because that GDP is divided over a lot of people. So comparing a larger country with a larger population to a smaller one. And the second thing is, if your own population is changing, Pakistan's population is increasing, but even if our GDP is the same, it actually means everyone's getting poorer because the GDP per capita per head would go down, and that's what we're interested in when figuring out standard of living. So what have we done so far? We've basically हमने national income के पहले फायदे बताए. We said on those very own metrics on national income ke apne grounds there are a few problems, and national income is a relatively better off metric when you take real and per capita national income. Now we're going to say, okay, even if you do all of that, it's still slightly problematic because there are a lot of other metrics that affect national income, your standard of living that we haven't even talked about. And I think we can do this by just talking about other indicators, because then those metrics just come into play. So other indicators that measure your standard of living, your first could be your HDI, your Human Development Index, and it does take GDP and all. Okay, वो तो लेता है, but the other two metrics, okay, bad arrows. Say the first other metric is life expectancy. And the reason I'm going like other while I'm taking other indices into account is because it just helps to link other metrics that are important apart from national income. So life expectancy is important. Greater life expectancy, higher living standard, because it indicates better access to healthcare. It indicates better sanitation. It also takes into account years of schooling. In fact, when the HDI was updated in 2010, it takes into account years of schooling, mean years of schooling, and the expected years of schooling as well. So to get a good idea of it, it also takes into account the literacy rate. And these are important metrics to gauge people's living standards. Although I don't know, CI type schooling so the better ab na hi padho, but okay, other metrics batao. We could take into account, we could look at metrics in the Human Poverty Index, because it talks about ji.
I would also I would go for measure of economic welfare pehle, generally, because like Mani do mention it more, so like
Yes.
I would do एक ही बात है पहले कोई.
Okay. So definitely go for mu and ISEW before HPI, but because it's measure of economic welfare, right? So like I would go for those two before HPI, but like because I've written HPI and I don't want to rub it because I wrote it, so I'll just इसे खत्म कर लेंगे. So access to clean water.
I think like we should either include MPI या फिर दोनों साथ ही बता दो, because that's a better indicator.
Yeah, so like basically uh, just you can group together the poverty indices and be like, huh, they look at stuff like access to clean water, to like healthcare, doctors per thousand, stuff of that sort. एक दो और examples बता दो of indices.
Average income per day.
Sorry.
Average income per day होगा इसमें include.
I वो तो national income में आ गया. I do feel that I think the HPA definitely takes, I think, national income into account, but वो तो like उसमें national income वाले factors में आ गया. What else, guys? Like leisure, and like a lot of other factors which if we ever revised. जी
एजुकेशन वगैरह भी, but that comes under
exactly, वो तो हमने पहले बता दिया, so like don't want to repeat that. Okay, so again back to the more important ones. So you have new, which is what, measure of economic welfare. क्या है? What's the full name?
measure
हाँ.
measure of economic welfare. It basically takes into account the externalities वगैरह and defense expenditures.
Okay, so idea here is that it basically accounts for regrettables, what as they call them. Regret, मेरी spelling बहुत बुरी है, please judge नहीं करना. Regrettables would be negative externalities, like environmental damage, all that type of stuff. Negative externalities, expenditure on defense, so all of this is subtracted from GDP, or basically from not so that it takes into account GDP and stuff like that, and it then subtracts negative externalities, subtracts expenditure on defense and so forth. Then you have ISEW, which is the Index on Sustainable Welfare, which is very, very popular with environmentalists because it takes into account a lot of factors, because it understands how a lot of factors are important to standard of living, not just national income. Definitely, negative externalities देखता है resource, depletion and all. Although we
stuff like child care and इस तरह की चीजें ना.
Yeah, and the more micro indices might be a little more useful because we're still talking about standard of living, while resource depletion and damage, they do eventually affect your standard of living, so you can still use that metric, but like stuff like time for leisure, क्या बोला तुमने? Child care, all of those types of things, those are important. Again, it's one has to be careful here that because you've learned these indices within the context of getting a good comparison between the standard of living of two countries, or rather the GDP. So you don't necessarily want to go write stuff like, okay, the ISEW includes क्या कहते हैं, chores and household and unpaid housework in GDP. Yeah, it might do so, but even so, it doesn't really help us with this question when figuring out the standard of living. So, be a little careful to stick to the question, basically. And we can conclude. What are we concluding with?
Question दिखाने?
Not a good sign. Not a good sign. Discuss whether an increase in national income is a reliable indication of an improvement in the standard of living for the people in that country.
हो सकता है, maybe.
Yes, but you have to add some substance here. So I'd say that you first of all say that, yeah, to a certain extent it is. Why? Because to my knowledge at least, all indices that measure standard of living, do take GDP into account, like do take national income into account. मतलब even HDI and all, उसका पहला metric national income ही होता है. Even with your ISEW and your MU, they still do take national income into account. So it is important. No one's saying it's not important. We're just saying it's not the only thing. So in a lot of cases, if it's the only thing you're looking at, it might be an incomplete measure. Like that's what you can call it. It could be an incomplete measure rather than an incorrect measure. So it could be incomplete measure rather than an incorrect measure. Anything else you can add to the conclusion?
Should you talk about the informal economies या जैसे black markets वगैरह?
Okay, so you can also talk about. We could have. In fact, we should have talked about that ऊपर. When we, I would say कि आप जब हम इधर बात कर रहे थे ना, here, so you could add how if national income is measured a little better if it takes into account the informal economy, or if it somehow manages to quantify what's going on in the shadow or the black market, then it would be a better you have a better estimate or indication of your living standard. Because either we talked about real, we talked about per capita, either he was about the issues of national income being potentially understated. We could have talked about that here. So good call. Um, Anything else here, or are we done?
I think that's.
Chalo, let's see how we did. Okay. Discussion of the weakness of using GDP as a measure of standard of living. Well, both हमने काफी किया. Partly overcome by using real GDP per capita. We did that as well, but omits social issues, right? Education, we talked about healthcare, sanitation, working hours. So बात कर सकते थे, we can include doesn't include unpaid work, which thankfully because Bilal pointed out we would have included. It doesn't include the informal economy, quality of goods, types of goods. Okay. So quality of goods की हम बात कर सकते थे. How that's the thing here is because since GDP is only looking at the monetary value of goods, maybe the prices are the same, but the quality has gone up, which indicates that your standard of living has gone up, but the GDP won't increase, so it won't be that good of a measure. Types of goods की तो हमने in fact बात की थी with defense capital हो रहे हैं, consumer हो रहे हैं. We've talked about environmental issues. We could have also talked about distribution of income because they just sustainability is basically linked to resource depletion. उसकी भी बात की. What do you guys think they mean by the short run versus the long run? Any idea?
Maybe examiner report पढ़ लो. Maybe they told something.
I think इस बारे में तो बात नहीं कर रहे कि like जब तुम अच्छा never mind.
Okay, so like yeah, we'll have to check the examiner report to figure out what they mean by that. But again, if you check the marking scheme and they've given like 11 different things and you haven't written all 11 of them, doesn't mean you aren't scoring well, because they just write all the possibilities. A nice word we could have used is how these are qualitative factors that need to be considered alongside the quantitative factor of GDP. Say there's a it's majorly the same as the marking scheme. It is a new this question concentrated on whether an increase in national income could indicate improvement standard of living within a country. Some countries wrote about whether it might be used as a comparison of different countries, and thus we're not answering the question. Basically what I said, don't be a little careful here. Don't be like no, GDP is not a good comparison because you need to measure it at purchasing power parity rates.